The stars had been watching for 300 years before they decided to come down. Sergeant Dario Benedetti noticed it first because he was the only one awake. That was the nature of the Castelvecchio night watch. You sat on the stone steps of the old garrison with a thermos of bad coffee, and you listened to the valley breathe. The Apennine hills to the east held their shapes against the dark sky like sleeping giants, and the distant lights of Pianura flickered between the ridges the way they always had, small and faithful and human. He had a habit of counting them. He was not a superstitious man. He was 38 years old and had been shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the thigh, and both times it was because he stopped paying attention. He did not stop paying attention anymore. He saw the streak at 216, not a meteor. Meteors moved on arcs you could follow. They burned and they died and they left a fade the eye could track. This one descended vertically and it slowed. He had never seen a thing decelerate from the sky. He stood up from the steps and the coffee tipped and he did not notice. The light passed below the ridgeline and was gone. No sound, no flash of impact. He stood there for a long time in the dark, holding nothing. By morning he had talked himself out of it. By afternoon the first body had turned up. Bernardo Cruciani was a doctor and a widower and a man who had long since stopped expecting anything good from the universe. His wife Marta had died 11 months ago. A road in the rain, a truck from the mineral works, and then nothing but the particular silence that settles into a house where someone is missing. He had a son named Giulio who was 8 years old and who still put on his mother's old cardigan sometimes and wore it around the apartment like a coat too big for him. Bernardo did not have the heart to take it away. He drove into the village that morning and examined the body they had pulled from the irrigation ditch below the Rossi estate. A man named Ferruccio Ponti, 62, retired schoolteacher. No marks on him. No water in his lungs, which meant he had been placed in the ditch after he was already dead. No cause of death Bernardo could identify short of laboratory work, and the laboratory was in Modena and took 3 weeks. He photographed the body from 3 angles, noted the temperature, took a sample from under the fingernails out of habit, and drove home. The valley lay open around the road. Rolling hills, terraced vineyards, the old stone walls that the Romans had begun, and every subsequent generation had maintained without ever quite agreeing on why. The light fell on it, all with the same indifference it had always had, and Bernardo drove through it thinking about a dead man who was comfortable in a ditch. He drove home with the window down because he needed the air. Giulio was sitting on the front step when he arrived. Not unusual. But the boy's expression was, the boy wore a look of private contentment, of someone who has recently been kept company, and it unsettled Bernardo more than the corpse in the ditch. "You were playing in the park again," Bernardo said. "Mama was there," Giulio said simply, the way a child announces facts. The way he might say it rained, or the bread is done. Bernardo stopped walking. He stood on the gravel path in the late light and looked at his son. "Giulio, she was. She pushed me on the swing. She smelled like herself." The boy considered this seriously. A child committed to accuracy. Like soap and the stuff she put on her wrists. Bernardo sat down on the step beside his son. He was a man trained to observe, and what he observed was that his son was not afraid. He was not disturbed. He was not displaying the fragile hopefulness of a grieving child who has invented a comfort. He was matter of fact. He was reporting a sequence of events. He wanted his father to have accurate information. That was the part that kept Bernardo from dismissing it entirely. He thought about what to say for a long time. The light changed on the gravel. Somewhere in the house the refrigerator cycled on and then off. "What did she say?" he asked finally. Giulio thought about it. "She said she's learning things. She said it's very different from what she expected." He looked at his father with Marta's dark eyes. The genetics of that, still, after everything. "She said she's not alone where she is." "Not alone," Bernardo repeated. "There are lots of them. She said they came from very far away and they've been watching us for a long time." Giulio pulled at a loose thread on the cardigan. "She said they were curious about us. She said we surprised them." Bernardo sat with this for a while. A doctor sits with information before he acts on it. He does not dismiss it because it is strange. He files it carefully and watches for what the next piece of evidence says. "What did we do that surprised them?" he asked. Giulio thought seriously. "She said they'll explain. She said you should come to the hill." Sergeant Benedetti's second body turned up 6 days later, this time in the wine cellar of the Marchetti estate. Ernestina Marchetti, 74 years old, found seated at the cellar table with a glass of wine in front of her. Not fallen, not sprawled, not the tangled, involuntary posture of sudden death, seated, as if resting, as if she had come to the cellar with a specific intention, and something had intervened before she could carry it out. And the intervention had been so complete that she had simply stopped. Same absence of cause as Ponty, same tidiness, same faint expression of calm that death very rarely produces, and that Benedetti, in 30 years of this work, had learned to read as meaning something specific and unpleasant. He drove to Dr. Cruciani's office and sat in the chair across the examination table and told him what he knew, which was very little, and asked him what he thought, which he rarely asked anyone, because he had rarely found anyone whose thinking was worth the trouble. Bernardo looked at the photograph of Ernestina Marchetti seated at her cellar table. He looked for a long time in the way he looked at patients who were presenting confusing symptoms, methodical and slow, peeling back what he expected to see in order to look at what was actually there. "She looks comfortable," he said. "Yes," Benedetti said, like she sat down voluntarily. "Yes, but the wine in the glass wasn't touched." Benedetti looked at him. "I didn't tell you about the wine glass." Bernardo looked up from the photograph. "You didn't have to." She sat down and she didn't drink. She sat down because something stopped her needing to. Something intervened between intention and act. He set the photograph down. "I have no scientific explanation for that." Benedetti nodded slowly. He picked up his hat. At the door he paused with the particular quality he had of making pauses contain weight. "Your boy still seeing his mother?" Bernardo was quiet for a moment. The light through the surgery window was yellow and ordinary. "He says she comes to the park. He says she talks to him." "What does she say?" "He won't tell me the whole of it. He says she's explaining something. Something about where she is now." Bernardo looked out the window at the hill with the ruined brick arches on the crest, visible from almost any point in the valley. "He says she's not alone." Benedetti put his hat on and left. Bernardo listened to his car start and the sound die down the road. Then he sat in the quiet surgery for a while, looking at the hill. The ruins on the hill above the village were Roman, or older. Bernardo had walked up there once in the first months after Marta died, looking for, he wasn't sure what. The archaeology of grief is imprecise. You go to places that feel connected without being able to say why they feel connected, because grief rewires the logic of connection and substitutes its own. He had sat among the broken arches as the wind came off the valley and thought about the way time eroded everything with perfect indifference. And he had not felt better and had not expected to feel better, but the going and the sitting had been something to do, which was its own small mercy. He had not gone back, he went back now. The path wound through scrub oak and limestone, and he climbed it in the late afternoon, past the briars and the old iron fence that no longer kept anything out, its purpose long outlasted by the time the things it was meant to exclude had stopped existing. The ruins opened before him, half arches against a reddening sky, ancient walls reduced to shin height, the grass between them thick and undisturbed, and in the center of it all lit by the long, failing light of the evening sun, Marta. He stopped walking. His body understood before his mind did. A full-body stillness, the kind that precedes a fall, the body's sudden awareness that the ground is uncertain. She was wearing the clothes she had worn the night before the accident. She was not transparent. She was not flickering at the edges the way he had been told ghosts flickered in stories he did not believe in. She was there, solid and real in the late light. And she turned when she heard him stop, and she looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not warmth, exactly. Something larger than warmth. Something without the complicated personal weather of love, without the need, without the hunger, without the specific relief of being seen by the person who knows you, without the texture of a life lived together, the private references, the arguments that never quite resolved, the way she had always touched the back of his hand when she wanted him to slow down. What was in her face now was something that had none of those things, something observational, patient. "Old Marta," he said. His voice came out normally. He had expected it to break. She tilted her head. The gesture was familiar. Marta's gesture. She was processing something she found unexpectedly interesting. But the quality behind it was not Marta's quality. It was the same gesture the way a translation is the same text. The shape, not the substance. "You are her husband," she said. The voice was Marta's voice, and the Italian was correct, and the cadence was off in a way he could not specify. Like a piece of music played in the right key but the wrong time signature. Like someone reading words in a language they have learned from books but never spoken aloud. "What happened to my wife?" he said. It was not quite a question. He was a doctor. He phrased things as precisely as he could even when his hands were shaking. She considered the phrasing as if it were a technical problem worth solving carefully. The body was available, she said. We do not take what is being used. We are very careful about that. We are not a pause, a reaching. We are not what you would call invaders. We needed to understand what bodies feel like from the inside, and we needed available bodies to do it. We waited for availability. We are patient. We have been patient for a very long time. The wind moved through the ruins. The old stones took it and did nothing with it, as they had taken every wind for 2,000 years. What are you? Bernardo said. We have been in orbit of this system for a very long time, she said. Her voice, Marta's voice, was gentle without being warm, patient without being cold, observing. Your species is remarkable, chaotic and brief and remarkably persistent. We lost our own bodies a long time ago. We did not expect to want them back until we watched you. You watched us, for 300 of your years. He looked at the face of his wife. He thought about Giulio at the swing set. He thought about the quality of patience Giulio had described. She's explaining something, she's not alone. The others, Bernardo said, Ponti, Ernestina Marchetti, also available. We were learning, testing, understanding what it is to have a body, what you eat, what you feel, what you do in the dark hours when no one is watching. She paused. Ernestina Marchetti made wine, she said, and something crossed Marta's face that was unmistakably wonder. The wonder of a being encountering for the first time a thing it was not prepared to find remarkable. We did not understand the purpose until we tried it. The fermentation, the patience of it, the way time improves some things and degrades others, and the knowledge of which must be learned slowly, by hand, over years. The way humans build whole vocabularies for the varieties of a single fermented grape. And Giulio, Bernardo said, and now the control in his voice did cost him something. A small withdrawal from whatever reserve he was working from. Something shifted in her expression. The observational quality receded slightly, and something else moved through it like light through water. The child, she said, is not in any danger. He sees us more easily than adults do. He has not yet learned to deny what he sees. His neurology is still open. He interprets experience before he categorizes it. And so he interprets our presence correctly, as presence, rather than dismissing it as impossibility. She paused. He has been teaching us. He says his mother used to hum when she cooked. Bernardo said nothing. We did not know what music was for, she said. We had observed it, we had recorded it. We had analyzed the waveforms and the neurochemical responses it produces, and we understood it as a tool, a cultural mechanism for cohesion, a signal of emotional state, a technology of coordination. We understood all of that, and we understood nothing. She looked at him with Marta's dark eyes. Then the child taught us. He sat in the park and he hummed the tune she used to hum, and he explained it to us as best an 8-year-old can explain it, which is to say he could not explain it at all, but he demonstrated it. And the body, she stopped. The body understood in a way we did not. The body knew. There is something in the muscle and the nerve that carries memory without requiring the mind. We had not anticipated that. What did it feel like? Bernardo asked quietly. He was asking as a doctor. He was asking as a man. He was not sure which impulse was stronger. It felt like something that does not have a word in any language we have encountered, she said. Including yours. She looked at him. It is possible that the reason you make music is because you need a form that fits the feeling, and language is not the right form. Beautiful, Bernardo said quietly. The word for the thing without a word. She repeated it after a moment, the way she had repeated everything, with the quality of someone writing it down inside themselves for future reference. Beautiful. Like someone learning a word for a color they have only just seen for the first time and are not sure their eyes are interpreting correctly. He did not tell Benedetti about the ruins. He was not sure why, perhaps because he was not ready for the mechanisms of authority to descend on whatever this was. The local prefect would make calls and forms would arrive, and men from Rome would come who had no training for this particular situation, and would impose on it the categories they already had, which would fit badly and cause damage. He was a doctor. He knew what happened when you applied the wrong treatment to the correct patient. He went back the next evening, and the next, and the conversation pushed further each time, deeper into territory he had not expected. He brought a notebook the third time, then stopped bringing it, because writing it down felt like a category error. Some things required different equipment. They were not aggressive. He had built, somewhere in the architecture of his fear during those first days, an expectation of aggression. The cold logic of a species that has decided it wants something and is prepared to take it. What he encountered instead was something like embarrassed gratitude. They were a consciousness that had existed for millennia without form, and form had turned out to be overwhelming. Not unpleasant, overwhelming. The difference between reading about the ocean and standing at the edge of it with the water around your ankles. Cold was overwhelming. They had not expected cold to be so precisely itself, so specific and complete. Hunger was overwhelming, not painful, or not only painful but urgent in a way that crowded out everything else which they found instructive. Laughter was overwhelming. They had laughed by accident, one of them, encountering a situation the body found comic, before the consciousness had processed why, and the physical response of laughter, the involuntary seizing of the diaphragm, the sound, the way it propagated through the chest, had stopped them completely for several minutes while they tried to understand what was happening. Grief was the most overwhelming thing of all. "How do you bear it?" she asked one evening, and it was the most genuinely curious question he had ever been asked. Not rhetorical, not philosophical. The question of a scientist looking at data that doesn't fit the model and needing to understand why. You know it ends, all of it. You know every person you love will die. You know you will die. And you continue, you make the wine anyway. You hum while you cook. You name your children and teach them to walk, and watch them walk away, and you wave and smile, and you pretend very convincingly that you are fine. He sat on a fallen block of Roman stone and looked at the valley lights below. The lights of Pianura, small and faithful. The lights of the farms on the ridge. The single red blink of the telecommunications tower on the far hill. A constellation of persistence, visible from space. He had thought about this question for 11 months. He had thought about it in the hospital corridor, and he had thought about it at the funeral, and he had thought about it every night since, in the specific small dark hours that grief always saves for its most serious work. He had not come to an answer that satisfied him, but he had come to an answer that was honest. "Because the alternative is to not do it," he said. "And we've tried that. That's what we look like when we're losing, not when we're fighting, not even when we're dying, but when we've stopped. We go quiet. We stop humming. We stop making the wine. We stop naming things. We stop building the arches even though we know they'll fall. And that's how you can tell. That's the signal we're in real trouble. Not when we're loud, not when we're angry, because we're always loud and always angry, but when we go quiet, when the humming stops." He picked up a piece of broken tile from the ground, turned it in his fingers. Fired clay, 2,000 years old, smooth with weather. Somebody's hand pressed into it once in a workshop on this same hill. The humming is the protest. It's the proof that we know what things are worth. You don't hum because things are easy. You hum precisely because they're not. It's what we do instead of surrendering. She was very still across the old arch from him. Still in a way that was not Marta's stillness but something older. Something that had watched stars complete their cycles and had not had a body to feel the heat. "We have been in the void for a long time," she said. "We did not hum." He looked at her. At Marta's face lit by the last of the light. "No," he said. "I didn't think you did." The third body was different. Renata Villanescu was 29 years old and had been working at the village school for one semester, brought in to replace a teacher who had retired suddenly in October, which was how Bernardo had come to meet her. The assistant principal had introduced them at the parent evening with a formality that was slightly more pointed than necessary, the specific formality of someone hoping you'll take a hint. And Bernardo had thought Renata was kind, and that she laughed easily, and that her presence in a room made the air feel slightly less heavy without her appearing to be trying. He had not allowed himself to think further than that. 11 months was not long enough, and he was not a man who rushed things he wasn't sure of. She was found at the base of the hill path. Not the ditch, not the wine cellar, not the impersonal places where strangers lay down and surrendered their bodies. At the base of the path that led up to the ruins, as if she had been going somewhere with intention, as if she had been called. Benedetti called him at 6 in the morning, and Bernardo sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after hanging up. He looked at the window. The sky was beginning. He thought about what it meant that they were using Renata, and what the choice signaled, and whether it was a choice at all, or whether it was simply, as she had said, availability. He went to the ruins alone at noon. He walked fast and he was breathing hard when he arrived, and she was there. Renata's body, Renata's face, the same look of careful patient attention that was not quite Renata's own. Behind Renata's eyes a quality that was very old and very quiet and not remotely afraid of him. He stood at the arch and looked at her and said nothing for a long time. I know, the presence in Renata's body said finally. The voice was right, but the rhythm was wrong, as it always was. I can feel what this body knew about you, the cellular memory. The specific way the muscles read your face. A pause. She was thinking about asking you to dinner. She had not yet decided whether to. She was weighing the timing against your grief and finding the calculation difficult. He exhaled. It was a sound that was not quite a word. She thought you were grieving in a way that was too careful, she said. She thought you were rationing your grief to protect your son, metabolizing it slowly so that it didn't overwhelm the household. She thought it was admirable, and she also found a word in her memory for it. She paused. Lonely. She thought you were very lonely in a specific way that careful people are lonely, because careful people manage everything so well that no one thinks to ask if they are managing. Don't, Bernardo said. I am not trying to cause pain. I am learning what honesty costs between people who know each other. We did not have bodies before, and so we did not understand that truth and pain occupy the same space sometimes. That you can tell a person something accurate and also hurt them with it, and that both things are true simultaneously. We find this a long pause, human. He sat down on the stone. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The gesture was not grief exactly. It was the gesture of a man demanding clarity of himself. Of a man who has been soft and is requiring himself to be a doctor again. What do you want, he said. All of you. What is the final purpose of this? You've been in these bodies for weeks. You've learned what you came to learn. What happens now? We must decide, she said, whether to stay or to leave. Whether the knowledge is worth the cost of what we are doing. She looked at him steadily. We are not certain the cost is ours to carry. We are becoming uncertain about who it belongs to. It belongs to us, Bernardo said. The families, the village, the living. Yes, she said, we know. That is part of why we must decide. Another pause. We also know that we will lose the bodies, that even if we stay we will lose them. They are borrowed. The loan is already in arrears. She looked at Renata's hands, turning them over as if reading something written there. We understand now why you grieve. The body makes it inevitable. To have a body is to know that you will lose it, to know everyone you meet in a body will lose theirs. And yet you keep meeting people, you keep introducing yourselves. You keep learning each other's names. Yes, Bernardo said. Why? He looked up at her, at Renata's face with something ancient behind it. Because the alternative is not meeting them. And then you lose them anyway, except without having known them. That's worse. She looked at him. Is it? You cannot miss what you never had. That's exactly wrong, he said, and his voice was steadier than he expected. What you can't do is mourn what you never had. Missing is different. Missing is for what should have been. If you never meet anyone, you spend your whole life missing all of them. All the ones you never knew. And you don't even have their names to put on the feeling. A silence between them that was the most articulate silence he had ever experienced. We did not know that, she said finally. In 300 years of observation, we did not know that. He brought Giulio up the hill that evening. He had not planned to. He had driven home, made dinner, pasta, the long kind, the kind that requires time and attention and both hands, and watched the boy eat with the unsettling, quiet competence of a child who has learned to manage ordinary things because the adults around him are occupied with grief. Then Giulio had looked up from his plate with Marta's eyes and said, with complete matter-of-fact certainty, "She needs to see us together." Bernardo had set down his fork. What does she need to see? Giulio thought about it seriously, the way he thought about all serious things, giving them the weight they deserved. What family looks like from the inside, he said. Not from space. Not from watching. She said she can watch all she wants and it doesn't make sense until you're in the middle of it. He looked at his father. She said she needs to be in the middle of it. They climbed the hill in the last daylight, father and son, Bernardo's hand on Giulio's shoulder. Not holding on in the possessive way of fear, just touching. The specific weight of a hand on a shoulder that means, I am here, you are not alone, we are going somewhere together. The most basic human information, transmitted by the simplest available channel. All of them were there. A dozen people, faces Bernardo recognized from the village, from the outlying farms, from the provincial rolls of the recently dead that Benedetti had been quietly tracking. Men and women and one very old man Bernardo recognized as someone who had died in the winter 2 years ago and had been mourned and buried and whose family had adjusted to absence. They stood among the ruins in the amber light, and they were watching Bernardo and Giulio climb the path with the attention of scientists at a crucial experiment. But their eyes were not cold. All those occupied faces, all those borrowed eyes, and not a single pair was cold. They looked like students on the last day of something important. They looked like beings that had spent a long time in the dark and had just, in the last moments of the light, understood what the dark had been for. Marta was at the center. She looked at Giulio and something crossed the borrowed face that Bernardo could not name. It was not love exactly, because it was not Marta's love. Marta's love had a specific texture he knew from 11 years of daily proximity, the way she held it in reserve in public and gave it without reservation in private. The particular form it took in crisis, which was practical and present, and never sentimental. What moved across the borrowed face was something that understood love from close enough to feel its gravity without being caught in its orbit. Something that had been orbiting for 3 centuries and had finally made a decision. Giulio walked to her without hesitation and took her hand. The ruins were absolutely still. The valley below lay open and lit. The distant lights of Pianura sent their signals upward into a sky that was for the moment occupied. Bernardo stood at the edge of it and watched his son hold the hand of the thing that wore his wife's face, and he watched his son's expression. Serene, certain, a child's profound acceptance of a situation that would have broken most adults. And he thought about everything they had told him. About the void. About 300 years of patient watching. About the question they could not answer, the thing they had traveled across uncountable miles of silence to learn. How beings who are so small and so temporary and so constantly in pain manage to produce what humans produce. And he thought, this is the answer. Not civilization, not the arches or the wine or the music taken as artifacts. This, a boy who has lost his mother, and yet takes her hand when she offers it, because the alternative is not taking the hand. And that is not something a human child, offered a hand, does. The stubbornness of it. The absolute refusal to let the scale of a thing stop you from responding to it as a human being. Humanity did not conquer the stars. Humanity just kept nothing. On dinner, on wine, on names, on hands held out in the dark, on the specific protest of humming when things were hard. It was the loudest thing in this part of the galaxy, apparently. Benedetti found Bernardo in the village square the next morning and sat across from him with coffee going cold between them and said nothing for a long time, which was his particular form of question. I need you to stop looking, Bernardo said. Benedetti looked at the cold coffee. The bodies, Bernardo said. I need you to let it rest for now. There are 12 missing persons reports from 5 surrounding provinces, Benedetti said. The prefect is calling me every second day. There is talk of bringing people from Rome. I know. The people from Rome will make this very much worse. I know. There is no legal mechanism by which I know. I'm not asking you to do anything legal. I'm asking you to do something human, which is understand a situation and respond to what it actually is instead of what the forms require it to be. Bernardo held his coffee. They're not violent. They're not dangerous. They came here to understand something, and they are close to understanding it, and then they will leave. If we put officials in front of them, they will leave faster, and we will understand less. If we let it finish it in our own way, we might learn something. Benedetti picked up the cold coffee, drank it, set it down. He looked at the square, the bread vendor, the olive jars, the old women in their black coats, who had been sitting at this square since before either of them was born, who had survived the war and the flood and the earthquake, and who would outlast the institutions that govern them by sheer stubborn persistence. Are they dangerous? He said no. Are you certain? They are 300-year-old intelligences who crossed the breadth of space to understand why we hum while we cook. They are not dangerous. They are very impressed with us. The sergeant picked up his hat. He turned it in his hands once, the specific gesture of a man arriving at a decision he can't quite document. How long? Not long. They said they didn't come to stay. Benedetti stood up, looked at the square again, then at the hill. If anyone from Rome calls asking if I have any information on anomalous fatalities in this jurisdiction, he said, I will tell them I do not, because the cases are not yet classified as fatalities pending laboratory results, which is technically accurate. He put on his hat. 1 week, Cruciani. Yes, Bernardo said, that will be enough. They left on a Tuesday, which seemed undramatic for a departure of that scale. Bernardo had expected something visible. A light, a sound, some manifestation large enough to mark the occasion. He had not expected the ordinary Tuesday quality of it. He was in the kitchen making coffee when it happened. A sensation like a change of air pressure, the feeling in your ears before a storm, except without the threat behind it. Something lifting. something that had been present becoming absent in a way that was only detectable by its absence. The way you notice a sound has stopped only after the silence has already had a few seconds to establish itself. He stood at the window and looked at the hill. The ruins stood in the early light exactly as they had always stood, broken and patient. No light, no sound. Only the valley below with its morning sounds. A tractor somewhere on the ridge, a dog. The bells of Sant'Angelo beginning the 7 o'clock that had been beginning every day for 200 years. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he heard a noise from Giulio's room. He went to the door and opened it. And his son was sitting up in bed in the pre-dawn light, awake and absolutely still in the particular way. Children are still when they are thinking something very large, something that requires the whole body to hold. "She's gone," Giulio said. Yes, the boy looked at his father. His expression was not the crumpled, red-eyed grief of the first weeks after Marta's death. When he had cried without warning in the middle of meals, and once in the car, at a red light, which had been one of the hardest things Bernardo had ever witnessed. This was something different. The face of someone who has received a gift and knows it was temporary and is in the process of deciding whether that makes it less of a gift. Bernardo sat on the edge of the bed. "Are you all right?" he said. A father's permanently insufficient question. Giulio thought about it with the gravity he gave all serious questions. Then, "She told me something. She said to make sure to tell you. She said, the void is full of voices. She said that there is no place in the universe that is truly empty. There are just frequencies you don't have the equipment to hear yet." He paused, working through the translation of something he had been given in terms slightly too large for him. "She said that's what the lights are for. The ones you see from the valley. She said you've always been broadcasting. She said you just didn't know anyone was receiving." Bernardo looked at his son in the blue-gray light. "She said humanity is very loud," Giulio added, the ghost of something almost like pride in his voice. "She said they could hear you from the next arm of the galaxy. She said you were the loudest thing in this part of space." "What are we broadcasting?" Bernardo asked softly. Giulio screwed up his face in the way he did when the right word was close but not quite there. Hovering at the edge of language where things live that haven't quite been said yet. "She said it doesn't translate. She said it's not language, it's more like." He stopped, then he looked at his father. "How do you say music when you don't have a word for music?" Bernardo looked at his son for a long moment. Then he put his arm around the boy's small shoulders, and they sat together in the window light. As the sky beyond the hill turned from blue to gray, to the particular rose gold of a dawn that belonged to nobody and to everybody, and had been arriving over this valley since before there were eyes here to receive it. Below the hill the ruins stood in the new light. The arches were still broken. Time had not repaired them. Nothing had come in the night to restore what centuries had taken. They stood exactly as they had stood for 2,000 years. Reduced and present. Proof that something had been here before. That someone had stacked stone on stone and called it shelter, called it home, called it enough. And that the stacking and the naming and the calling had mattered, even though the thing called had long since become rubble. Benedetti found 2 women the following week. Alive, disoriented, with gaps in their memory that they described as dreamlike, and with the shared report of having felt, during whatever had happened to them, a quality of being looked at by something enormous and old that was not unkind. He put the reports in a folder, the folder in a drawer, the drawer he locked. 30 years on the job, he knew which information served no useful purpose in which system. The village returned to itself, the market on Thursdays, the bells on the hour. The bread from the Farinacci bakery that had been baking in the same building since 1841, and had survived 2 wars, an earthquake, and the flood of 1963, and was still there, still warm, still filling the morning square with the smell of something continuing. Bernardo drove past the school on Thursday and saw the lights on, the substitute teacher at the board, children's hands going up. He watched through the car window for longer than he intended, and then drove on. He made pasta that night. The long, patient kind that required working the dough by hand, which Marta had always done while she hummed. He worked the dough in the quiet kitchen with the late light coming in at an angle, and he found that a tune had started somewhere in the back of his throat without his deciding to start it. Not a specific song, not Marta's tune, just the sound a person makes when their hands are occupied, and the evening has a particular quality, and they have decided, against the evidence, without quite announcing it to themselves, to continue. He was still humming when Giulio appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, drawn by the light, and the smell the way children are drawn to wherever the warmth is. The boy sat at the table, opened his homework and bent over it. He didn't ask about the humming, he didn't comment. He just took out his pencil and began to write, and after a while, quietly, barely audible, he was humming too. The two of them, in the kitchen, in the light, in the ordinary Tuesday evening of a valley that had been there since before anyone had language for it. Humming the same loose, aimless, continuous note into the air of a house where someone was missing and where. Despite that, someone was making dinner, and someone was doing homework, and the two of them were, in the most basic available way, fine. In orbit, 300 kilometers above the Apennines, nothing at all was visible to the instruments of 1987. The space above the valley registered as empty. The signals that the telescopes were pointed at were pointed elsewhere. But the space above the valley was not broadcasting silence. It had not, in fact, been broadcasting silence for some time. The signals were too faint for the arrays of that era, and too complex for the classifiers available then. They were persistent in a way that the engineers would have flagged as instrument and artifact had anyone been looking in that direction, with the right equipment and the right questions. They were regular with a precision that would have required explanation. They were structured in a way that did not occur in nature. In 17 years, a doctoral student at the University of Bologna, named Clara Ferretti, would isolate a pattern in archival radio data that her supervisor would dismiss. She would not dismiss it. She would spend 4 years building a case for the pattern, and the case would survive every methodological challenge she threw at it. And the field that grew from that argument would eventually have a name. She would say in every interview for the rest of her career that the thing that convinced her, not the complexity, not the persistence, but the regularity, the thing that could not be noise, was that it repeated. It came back. Whatever it was had not gone anywhere. Whatever it was had been here and had left and had continued, from wherever it had gone, to send back what it had learned. Like the lights of a valley seen from a hill, small and faithful, saying, "Here, we were here. We found something worth finding, and we are telling you. And we will keep telling you, and we will be patient. Because patience is something we learned from you. We learned it from the arches you build, knowing they will fall. We learned it from the wine you make, knowing you will drink it, and it will be gone. We learned it from the children you name, knowing they will leave. We learned it from the graves you tend. We learned it from the hum. The universe does not insist on anything. Matter arranges itself, stars burn, planets cool, and none of it makes demands. And then there is you, brief and loud and perpetually rebuilding, sending your signals out into a dark that you know is mostly empty and humming anyway, into the emptiness, for the specific reason that you believe someone is out there, that someone is receiving, that the dark is not the whole story. You were right, we received you.